Hello everyone, welcome to People's Dispatch. Hello everyone, welcome to People's Dispatch. Welcome to the International Daily Roundup. Sorry about that. Our first story comes from Hong Kong. In new developments from the rest of Hong Kong, the city's chief executive, Carrie Lam, announced on September 4th that the controversial extradition bill shall be completely withdrawn. The bill that was introduced earlier this year sparked some of the largest bouts of protest in the post-handover Hong Kong. It was suspended earlier in June and was set aside to lapse. The ongoing protests that have been raging on continuously for nearly 3 months came about with widespread fear and paranoia of Hong Kong losing its autonomy to Beijing through the extradition bill. The government's move to fully withdraw the bill is seen as an attempt to subside the unrest that has severely affected the city's economy, which was already undergoing a slowdown even before the protests began. But indications on the ground do not show any signs of protests backing down, as Lam and her government have become increasingly unpopular for the handling of the unrest. Ever since July, a section of the protests have turned increasingly belligerent as they clash with the police and pro-government demonstrators. Police, on the other hand, has responded with arrests of hundreds of protesters, opposition leaders, and activists. According to reports, the protesters refuse to back down unless the government steps down and releases all those arrested during the unrest. Now for our second story, the US has imposed fresh sanctions on an Iranian oil shipping network for its ties with Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, a branch of the Iranian armed forces. The US has also announced a $15 million reward for information which can disrupt the finances of the IRGC and stop its illicit oil trade. In June, US had imposed sanctions and categorized IRGC as a terrorist organization. Meanwhile, Iran has announced further withdrawal of its commitments to the nuclear deal or the JCPOA. It had already breached limitations set on its stockpile of enriched uranium and also breached the cap set on the purity of enrichment in July. Now, Iran will reopen its development program for centrifuges to speed up enrichment. It had stopped the program after the JCPOA was signed in 2015. Iran says it will reverse all these steps and go back to its commitments once the nuclear deal's European signatories provided a way to bypass the impact of sanctions imposed by the US on the sale of its oil. Yesterday's fresh sanctions and the Iranian announcement reveals the failure of the French initiative to provide $15 billion credit line to Iran by the end of the year to help it deal with the impacts of the sanctions and comply with the deal. The US had proclaimed its disagreements with the French proposal earlier. After unilaterally withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, it signed with Iran and 5 other countries in 2015 last year. The US had imposed various sanctions on Iran demanding renegotiation of its terms. And our last story comes from South America. On September 4th, thousands of people mobilized across Argentina demanding the immediate approval and implementation of the Food Emergency and Social Emergency Acts in order to address the growing poverty and food insecurity in the country. Community canteens were organized throughout the country to serve cooked food to thousands of needy people suffering from poverty, hunger, and homelessness. In Buenos Aires, thousands demonstrated outside the Argentine National Congress demanding the approval of a unified version of 7 bills on food emergency that awaits its approval in the Congress since 2017. The law proposes the creation of the National Food and Nutrition Security Program to guarantee food for the most vulnerable population, that is children less than 16 years old, which would imply an increase in the budget for afternoon snacks, and lunch in public schools and the distribution of 10 billion pesos to strengthen its implementation. Another demonstration was held outside the Ministry of Social Development to demand a decent increase in salary in the face of rampant inflation and the loss of purchasing power. It's important to note that the minimum monthly income of an Argentinian is 7,500 pesos, while the basic food basket exceeds 32,000 pesos. Since the beginning of the year, Argentinians are continuously mobilizing to protest the increasing inflation, unemployment, poverty, homelessness, food insecurity, as well as devaluation of the national currency and the neoliberal economic policies, of the right-wing government of Cambiemos alliance led by President Mauricio Macri. That's all we have time for in this episode of the International Daily Roundup. Thank you for watching, and if you would like to find out about more news, you can always log on to our website, peoplesdispatch.org. Thank you.